Hello, my friends, and this is a Reddit story that are unexplained or just scary, and it's worth listening. So sit back and relax and subscribe to this channel. Let's start. I was 8 when the first kid died. Abigail Lilly was screaming at me for touching her Barbie doll, dropped dead in front of us. Penn Carson was next, collapsing in math class. Then Jasper Michaels, his eyes rolling back during assembly. I was staring right at him, waiting for the teachers to notice him lip-syncing the Pledge of Allegiance. But then, he was dead too. Kids started dropping in the hallways, on their desks, even in the street. It wasn't just my town. Child deaths skyrocketed across the U.S. The CDC insisted this wasn't a virus or outbreak. It wasn't contagious. It was a pandemic that didn't make sense. By then, 50% of my town's children were gone. There weren't enough body bags, and families were too scared to go near the bodies. Scientists swore it wasn't a virus, though the world screamed otherwise. All I knew was school was canceled indefinitely, and people feared their children. With most of the kids on my street dead, I played alone, until people started throwing rocks at me, calling me an omen. So I stayed inside. By my 10th birthday, half the world's children were gone, and survivors like me were treated like animals. It became illegal to house anyone under 18. My town was lenient, though. By 16, only 3 of us were left, me, Kiara, and Kenji. Since school had been abandoned when we were little kids, we scavenged houses for food. When Kiara's nose started bleeding, I knew what was happening. I held her when she died, her face pressed against my shoulder. She didn't scream or cry, just like the others. Kenji was next, his eyes rolled back ranks. He spluttered, and I stumbled back, like he was contagious. "Wait, Nate, am I going to die?" "It's just a nosebleed," I said, and then choked on my words when his body went limp, crumpling to the ground. Like Kiara, I held him in my arms, and the words that had been violently choking me since I was a little kid spluttered from my mouth. "I need to tell you something." Kenji's lips formed a small smile, his eyes flickering. "Oh yeah? What's that?" Gently laying him down, I ran home, kicking through flyers promising a new tomorrow for survivors at a newly opened testing facility. Kenji was an escapee. It wasn't a facility, it was a prison. "Mom!" I screamed, throwing myself down the basement steps. She hadn't moved since I was 7, after my baby brother and sister died. But her hands had moved, and were still moving. Bloodied scribbles covered the walls, the latest ones still dripping in a language I didn't know or understand. Kenji, Ciara, and no doubt the group of kids locked up in the testing facility. "Mom!" I knelt beside her, snatching ancient monograms from her skeletal fingers. "Stop," I whispered. My gaze trailed to the wall. "Sam and Poppy have enough friends to play with now." In 2012, I was living in a coastal area of the northeastern U.S., working for an agency that mostly monitored and enforced environmental compliance. I'd prefer to keep the state and agency secret, since I'm not sure the legality of talking about this. However, they issued building permits for structures and work being done alongside protected wetland habitat. Usually these were things like piers, docks, bulkheads, etc. What my job entailed was visiting these properties with a copy of the blueprint included with the permit application, then taking measurements, and sometimes photos, and comparing them to the blueprint to ensure that the applicant did only the work they said they were going to do, and nothing more. On this particular day, I had a few sites to visit, and one of them was to check on a dock that was supposedly built in a backyard extending through a salt marsh and into the bay. This all took place in houses that would nauseate me to find out how much they were worth. If you're picturing a neighborhood, very large houses with immaculate landscaping and waterfront views, you have the right idea. What set this house apart from all the others was how utterly wrong this place looked for where it was located. It had rotted wooden siding, a roof that was falling apart, and a lawn that looked like it hadn't been mowed all summer. In fact, the only thing that didn't look ancient and unkempt was the white picket fence, which was pristine as though it had been painted earlier that week. I double-checked the address and the blueprint, finding that while I had the right address, the house looked nothing like how it did in the blueprint, appearing to be a different shape. I approached the front door, only to find the storm door wide open and the screen door closed, but torn in several places. Now, while my job did not require me to make site visits while the owner was there, or even inform them that I was arriving, I still always tried the front door first, so that the owners didn't think I was just some stranger skulking around their yard. I knocked and rang the doorbell a few times, confused by the fact that nobody was answering, since someone surely had to be home if the door was hanging open. After waiting a bit, I decided that the people living there might have been in their backyard, and that I would let them know I was there when I went around back. The only problem was that there was no way to go around back. The immaculate white fence, which was probably a good 6 tall at the shortest, did not appear to have any gate connecting seamlessly to the fences belonging to the 2 neighbors. While this struck me as odd, it was nothing I hadn't run into before. Some people didn't have gates and would begrudgingly let me in through their front door to access their yard. But still not expecting anyone to answer, after fruitlessly trying to get a good view, I resigned myself to trying to pull myself up and peer over the top of the fence. What I found there was a blank, perfectly square yard, completely level, with grass so green and low trim that it looked like it belonged on a golf course. It didn't seem to make sense being that well manicured, since I already proved there was no way for someone to get a lawnmower around back. And if the owners were willing to put that much effort into the back lawn and the fence, why was everything else so unkempt? Weirder still, the lawn was otherwise featureless. No furniture, no trees or flower beds. Just a solid blank square of grass without even a sunspot or wild clover to be seen. Looking for the dock, though, I found that the fence even stretched across the back of the property, again with no gate. Now this made even less sense to me. Why would anyone build a dock they couldn't access? Why would anyone meet the markup for waterfront property only to block off their view of and access to the water? Utterly confused, I was getting ready to just call this one a failed assignment and head back to my office. But as I was heading back to my car, I looked again at the front door. Someone had to be home, right? Maybe there was some weird esoteric way to access the dock through the fence, and maybe putting the face of a person to all this would make the experience seem less weird to me. I made for the windows. They were filthy and had ratty pink curtains drawn. But I tried my best to subtly peek through a gap and see if I could find signs of people inside. The living room of the house looked even worse than the exterior. Eggshell paint was spotted with mildew and peeling off the walls. The thin green carpet had been torn in several places, leaving it intact in some places and laying in crumpled heaps elsewhere. Light fixtures were broken or hanging limply from the ceiling, and I could not see a single piece of furniture. It was the exact opposite of what I was hoping to see in there, and with some dread, I accepted that I would try the door one more time before calling it quits. With the storm door open, I called out into the house asking if anyone was home. No answer. I explained further who I was and what I was there to do. No answer. With my face so close to the door, I was beginning to catch whiffs of the air inside. It was sour and briny, stinking of stale seawater and the decaying detritus of low tide on a hot day. It smelled like the house had at one point been filled with seawater, then allowed to sit stagnant in there for ages. Years later, I still don't know what got into me to take a step into that house. I think I was growing concerned for the owner. What if the place had been ransacked and someone was hurt inside? What if someone couldn't get to the door or call out because they were incapacitated? Whatever the reason, I opened the screen door and took a step inside. Just one step. Enough to peek my head through the door. What immediately hit me was the intensity of the smell from before, so suffocating I almost choked on it. I quickly began to worry that someone might be dead inside, and I called out again, asking if anyone was home and if they were okay. Now to cut away for a moment to give a bit more context. I am no stranger to supernatural experiences, even less so now than I was back then. Between seeing deceased relatives as a kid and the occasional glimpse of a stranger at a historical site or flickering in and out of my vision, apparitions were still occasionally startling, but seldom worrying. Usually these manifest for me as seeing the vague image of a person for a short blink of time, as though watching a video and the person is only present for 1 or 2 frames, just long enough to barely register what you saw. More often, it manifests for me as a feeling, a subtle change in air pressure or an electrical quality to the air. Imagine the feeling you get when someone is right behind you. You cannot see or hear them, but their presence is somehow felt. It's like that, but in greater magnitude and more focused, usually still subtle enough to ignore it if you weren't paying attention. That was not what I felt in that house. As soon as I called out, that feeling of presence was incomparably loud and impossible not to notice, like a person bellowing for me to leave. I actually fell to my knee in surprise, my pants getting dirtied by some liquid the carpet seemed saturated with. The smell, the loudness of that presence, I felt like my breath was being pulled out of me. Then I heard a banging from somewhere above the ceiling. I thought it was footsteps at first, coming from the second floor. They sounded like someone was stomping aggressively as they paced around in a circle. Or rather, the rhythm sounded wrong for footsteps and too loud. It sounded like someone was slamming something heavy, repeatedly down onto the floor. I was already back at my car by the time I realized I had bolted. I've had many more paranormal experiences since then, but to this day, I have never experienced that kind of deep, instinctual animal panic from them. Now, if you've been paying attention and can break this story down to its basic components, you might be wondering what I later did when I went home. Could this have just been a weird house with a squatter inside? You had a panic attack and imagined some things? Well, for months afterward, that was how I justified it to myself. Attempts to contact the owner back at the office told me that the phone number was not in service. While my boss was initially disappointed that I didn't complete the site visit, he also understood that sometimes you just can't get access and have to try again some other time. For a while after that, the weird house fell to the back of my mind. In the fall, Hurricane Sandy hit, and that meant my plate was full with all the permits sent in to repair storm damage. It was spring by the time I finally found the permit to that particular house again, dreading that I would have to go back. This time, I brought my work camera just in case, hoping to at least document my visit even if I didn't get access. But the thing is, when I drove back to the address for the second time, the house was not there. To be clear, I don't mean it had been replaced with a new house, nor do I mean the house had been demolished, leaving an unoccupied lot at the corner of those two streets where it once stood. I mean it was as though the house had never been there. The two adjacent houses now seemingly much closer to each other, each occupying perpendicular sides of the corner. As with the first time, I compared what I saw to the blueprints, and indeed the two houses were the addresses of the houses on either side of my assignment. But the house I went there to see just wasn't there, and appeared as though it never had been. Only that blueprint confirmed to me that there had been a house there. I took pictures of the unoccupied corner, returned to my boss with a shrug and the evidence of the house's non-existence, and the matter was eventually dropped while I moved on to other assignments. I want to know, has anyone else had similar experiences with vanishing buildings or ones that just didn't seem real?